Hi Math 1 students, let's go ahead and get started. Please go ahead and pause the video, create the outline of your notes, and I'm going to go ahead and start filling this out. Remember students, my requirements, I do have a title. It is 1.1 Solving Simple Equations, and in pen make sure you put your name, first and last name, and then obviously the date and period. We are talking about solving simple equations, and I believe this video is going to cover 1.1 and 1.2 solving multi-step equations. The first thing that we need to cover is this word inverse, and our essential question for those avid students, if you like, our essential question is, how can you use simple equations to solve problems? So the first thing we need to know is this inverse operation. What does that mean? Inverse, some students think of it as opposite operations, or some students think of it as undoing an operation, to undo. Okay, so if we're talking about, if we have a positive sign, we know that the inverse operation is a negative, or if we have addition, we know our inverse operation is subtraction. But don't forget that if you have subtraction, the inverse operation is addition. So it actually goes both ways. Okay. If you see multiplication, the inverse operation is division, and vice versa. If you see division, the inverse operation is multiplication. Okay, so please make sure you understand inverse operation. That means the opposite of addition is subtraction, opposite of subtraction is addition, opposite of multiplication is division, opposite of division is multiplication. Okay, we're undoing an operation. So let's go ahead and start with example 1. Example 1 is going to ask us to solve each equation. Okay, and what I like to do, students, I'm your teacher, so I'm going to do this every single time. I'm going to find that variable. Once I find that variable, whatever number is attached to that variable, you have to get rid of it, because your ultimate goal is to get the variable on one side of the equal sign and your constant on the other side. So my inverse operation of subtraction is addition, and this is why I'm adding 7 to both sides. Your final answer is going to be 24. X equals 24. Please show your work. You can simply show it by adding 7 to both sides. You don't need to put a box. Again, I put the box around it because that tells me I'm isolating, which means I'm leaving the variable by itself. Okay. All right, our favorite, my favorite. Okay, my favorite is fractions. So here is my variable. I need to get rid of this negative 1/4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 1/4 to both sides. Now, in order for me to add fractions, adding or subtracting fractions, you must have a common denominator. Okay, so my common denominator, I have 2 and 4. My common denominator is going to be 4. 4 is what I'm going to use. So in order for me to add or subtract these, I need to change this to a 4 by multiplying it by a 2. And whatever you multiply your denominator by, you must do that with you must multiply your numerator by. So I'm going to have a negative 2 over 4. And I'm just going to simply rewrite this. The 1/4 is not going to change. Plus 1 over 4. Now, students, all you have to do is add or subtract your numerators and keep your denominator. So D is equal to, and we have a negative 2 and we have a positive 1. Negative 1, and keep your denominator negative 1/4. Okay, so this is a vertical way to solve it. You can solve it by using the horizontal way, which is fine. I believe that's in your textbook as well. Okay, let's move right along. example 2 is going to ask us to do the exact same thing, solve each equation. So I have my variable, let me use this one. If I isolate my variable, okay, notice how multiplication is occurring between this -3 and the x. So in order for me to get rid of it, I must use the inverse operation of multiplication, which is division. So I must get rid of that -3 by dividing each side by -3. Final answer is x equals -4. Again, I'm showing my work, I'm boxing or highlighting my final answer. Okay. Division is occurring between the variable and the constant, okay? And the inverse operation of division is multiplication, and this is why we are multiplying each side by 2. And 8 times 2, your final answer is 16. Okay. All right. This is the gist of 1.1, which is solving simple equations. Let's move right along to 1.2. We are going to do a few problems in class when we're on our Google Meet, questions on our own. So I'm going to leave some space there. And here is 1.2. It looks like we have, let me center this. Solving multi-step equations. Again, please make sure you have a title. You are going to be uploading these notes in Google Classroom. Example 1 to solve the equation. So we are now using multi-steps, not just one step, not adding, not subtracting, multiplying, dividing. It's going to require several steps, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. Multiple steps. So the first thing that we want to do is find that variable, and we're actually, because this is a multi-step, we're actually going to have to put a box around that 2 and the x, because we have to get rid of this -1 before we can do anything with this 2. So let's go ahead and use our inverse operation of a -1 is +1. 2x is equal to 4. And now we can get rid of that 2, which again, multiplication is occurring there, students. So in order for us to get rid of the 2, we must divide it out, because the inverse operation of multiplication is division. Okay. And there's your final answer, x equals 2. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and move right along. Again, you want to find that variable. Isolate the variable. Let's actually write down the steps for B. Everyone must do this in your notes. I will be looking for this in your notes, okay? Here we go. Steps. I'm not going to ask you, obviously, to do it for every single problem, okay? I am going to pick a few problems that I would like you to, it's probably going to be B and D. So the first thing that I'm going to show is I am isolating the variable. So isolate the variable. I might even call on some of you guys to read out the steps or verbally say the steps. Okay, we're going to isolate that variable. I'm going to color code these two. You know how I am with my colors, okay? The next thing we want to do is subtract 7, because that's our inverse operation. Subtract 7. We want to move it on over. Okay, we want to subtract 7 from both sides. Once we do that, students, we end up with x over 2 is equal to -3. Okay, and let's go and isolate our variable one more time. And to get rid of this 2, again, division is occurring between the variable and the constant. The inverse operation of division is multiplication. So multiply each side. Oops. and you end up with x equals negative 6. The last step you can do is simplify. You don't have to write this out, but I'm just letting you know. Simplify, that means that we're multiplying negative 3 times 2. Okay. There are your steps. Okay. All right. Let's move right along. C. Okay. Isolate the variable. Get rid of this negative 6, so we're going to add 6 to both sides. We do not need to write down the steps, but you do need to show your work. Okay, 13 plus 6 gives me 19. 19 equals 1 over 3x, 1/3 x. Okay, now what you need to do is, this is a fraction that's occurring here, but multiplication is happening between the 1/3 and the variable. So to get rid of that, we must take the reciprocal, okay? To get rid of that 1/3, we must multiply each side by the reciprocal. So when we multiply each side by the reciprocal, that is 3 over 1. And when you do that, your 3's and your 1's cancel out, and now you're left with 3 times 19, which is 57. And there you have it. Okay, I'm going to actually, this step, we're going to say multiply each side. Multiply each side by the reciprocal. All right, we are going to write out our steps for D. Okay, because there's actually something that we're going to have to do before we do anything. And here we can actually combine like terms. So 5x plus 4x, they're both positive. They're on the same side. So we're simply going to add them. I'm going to bring everything else down. And then you'll notice that this kind of looks like what we did in example 1a. Okay. I am going to isolate the variable. There it is, and I'm going to actually add 8 to both sides. I'm going to write that down as well. Add 8 to both sides. And as you can see, the last step, if I isolate the variable, I need to get rid of that 9. Multiplication is occurring between the 9 and x. Inverse operation of multiplication is division. X is equal to 3. Okay, and again, you don't have to write this down, but I always like to write down simplify. Okay. All right, students. Let me see. Oh, I'm sorry. We do have an example 2. Okay, so we have an example 1, which we're solving the equation. Occasionally we wrote down our steps. Let's keep going. This is going to be our last section, I believe. Okay. All right. Okay, so we are going to be solving, and as I mentioned, multi-step equations. Okay, and so sometimes you might encounter parentheses, and with the parentheses we want to make sure we follow the rules. I'm just looking for something and can't seem to find it. And so what we're going to have to do is use the distributive property before we can add, subtract, combine like terms, isolate the variable. If you have a set of parentheses, students, you have to use distributive property. So let's go ahead and do that. And what I like to do, students, I put a circle around it and I'm drawing my arrows, just indicating that I must multiply to both terms on the inside. So 4 times x is 4x. 4 times a negative 6, negative 24. Do not forget this minus 1, and we know it equals 31. You know what? Let's actually write down the steps for this problem. Again, we're not going to do it for every single problem, but let's do it for this one. We distributed 4 into parentheses. Okay. All right. So once you've distributed it into the parentheses, let's take a look. Okay. We actually can, what can we do here? We can actually combine like terms. We're adding 2 negative numbers. So 4x, this gives me negative 25 equals 31. Isolate my variable and add 25. Bring down that 4x. 4x is equal to 56. And your last step, okay, divide by 4, final answer, 14. And again, you can write out simplify. All right, let's move right along, students. This is going to be our last one. We do not need to write down steps. Let's go ahead and, if you have parentheses, let's distribute that into the parentheses first. Okay, so we have 15 equals 5 plus 4 times 2d gives me 8d. We have a negative, or 4 times a negative 3 is negative 12. Okay, next thing we want to do is combine like terms. Where are they at? We have a positive 5, a negative 12. They're on the same side, so we simply just combine them. You don't need to take the inverse of anything. It's going to be a negative 7 plus 8d. All right, let's go ahead and add 7 to both sides. And we end up with 22 is equal to 8d. It looks like we may have a fraction here, which is fine. And we end up with 22 over 8. Simplify. We know we can divide a 2 out, and that will give us 11 over 4. There's your final answer. Okay. All right, fantastic.